It all started with a tragedy that shocked the world. On a clear October day in 1997, beloved singer-songwriter John Denver died when the small plane he was piloting crashed into Monterey Bay. At first, many fans struggled to understand how someone so deeply connected to the skies could be involved in such a disaster. The mystery around what went wrong fueled endless theories: mechanical failure, pilot error, even foul play. For nearly 3 decades, the full truth was clouded by rumors and unanswered questions. John Denver wasn't just any celebrity. He was the face of folk music in the 70s, with hits like Take Me Home, Country Roads, and Rocky Mountain High. He was deeply passionate about aviation, logging thousands of flight hours. That love for flying made the crash even more devastating. How could someone so experienced make such a fatal mistake? That tension between Denver's skill and the tragic outcome kept people wondering not just what happened, but why. Over time, investigators pointed to a few possible causes, everything from instrument misreading to fatigue or distractions in the cockpit. But none of these explanations felt complete. So the mystery remained, and passion grew for uncovering the truth. Fans and experts discussed possible scenarios for years, each one adding a new layer to the story, but still no definitive answer. And then something fresh came to light. New evidence and modern technology brought a surprising twist that no one saw coming. It wasn't a mechanical fault or a secret sabotage. Instead, the real cause turned out to be something much more subtle and unsettling. And the truth? It wasn't pretty. In the silent expanse of the bay, what really happened to John Denver wasn't just tragic. It was a hard lesson about human limits, decision-making under pressure, and the cost of pushing too far. After John Denver's death, theories started flying almost as quickly as the headlines did. At first, people thought maybe the plane had a mechanical problem. That would have made sense. It was a homemade experimental aircraft, after all. The model he was flying, a Rutan Long-Easy, was small, lightweight, and not something you see every day. Some believed maybe something just snapped, something he couldn't control. But early reports showed that the engine was running fine right up to the moment of the crash. So that ruled out a total engine failure. Another theory focused on pilot error. Despite John having logged over 2,700 flight hours, some thought maybe he made a mistake in the final seconds. The plane crashed shortly after takeoff, and Denver hadn't filed a flight plan. That raised eyebrows. People began to wonder if he was flying casually, without enough planning. There were also questions about his training on that specific aircraft. He hadn't flown that particular plane often, and even though he was a skilled pilot, it's different when you're not fully used to the controls and layout. Then came the whispers about fuel. Could he have run out? Or was there some sort of leak? It turns out the plane had a very unusual fuel system. The fuel selector valve, the switch you use to change fuel tanks, was located in a hard-to-reach spot behind the pilot's shoulder. That's not just inconvenient, it's dangerous. Imagine trying to turn around mid-flight, strapped in, just to reach something that should have been in front of you. Some say it was a disaster waiting to happen. And there was more. Denver's own flying habits started being examined under a microscope. Years before the crash, he had faced a few incidents involving alcohol. Though toxicology reports after the crash came back clean, no drugs or alcohol in his system, some still wondered if previous issues had played a role in how comfortable he felt taking risks in the air. It's important to note, there's no proof that he was impaired at the time. But his past made people question if he was always playing it as safe as he should have. These pieces painted a confusing picture. No one theory seemed to explain everything perfectly. It wasn't until investigators combined all the technical details with cockpit layout problems and human behavior that the real story started to come together. And what they found. It was heartbreaking and avoidable. As the official investigation continued, the National Transportation Safety Board, better known as the NTSB, began to put together the final pieces. They examined every inch of the wreckage, every second of flight data, and every witness account they could gather. What they discovered wasn't dramatic or flashy, but it was chilling because of how simple and preventable it was. The main cause wasn't engine failure. It wasn't weather. It wasn't even a complex technical malfunction. It came down to something incredibly basic: fuel tank switching. On this particular aircraft, John Denver had to manually switch between the left and right fuel tanks while flying. The problem was, the valve to do that wasn't where you'd expect it to be. Instead of being within easy reach on the dashboard or between the seats, it was placed behind the pilot's left shoulder, an awkward and dangerous location. Reaching it required twisting and leaning back, which in a small cockpit is a risky move, especially during flight. The NTSB concluded that John had likely been trying to switch fuel tanks mid-air. Investigators believe he turned his attention away from the controls to reach that valve, lost proper control of the aircraft for just a moment, and in that instant, the plane went into a dive. There wasn't enough time to recover. The plane hit the water nose first, killing him instantly. There was no mayday call. No sign of panic. Just a split-second action that turned deadly. Even more frustrating was the fact that John had reportedly complained about the fuel valve's location before. He knew it was a problem. In fact, he had mentioned it to the mechanic who worked on the plane. But changes hadn't been made. And because of FAA rules, he wasn't even technically supposed to be flying that plane at the time. His medical certificate had expired. Yet he still chose to fly, believing he could handle it. In the end, the NTSB ruled that the crash was caused by the pilot's attention being diverted to manipulate the fuel selector valve, resulting in a loss of control. That was it. Not a dramatic mid-air failure. Not a secret conspiracy. Just a moment of distraction, made worse by a poor design and one risky decision. And that's what makes it so tragic. Because it didn't have to happen. When the final report came out, it hit a lot of people hard. Fans around the world had been hoping for a different explanation, maybe something mechanical that felt more out of John's control. But instead, what they got was a deeply human story. A small mistake. A bad cockpit design. And a few choices that, put together, ended in disaster. It was the kind of conclusion that doesn't give much comfort, because it was preventable. And that's what made it so painful. Many of John's close friends and fellow musicians were devastated. This wasn't just some singer. They were mourning someone who had brought joy, peace, and love through music for decades. Songs like Annie's Song and Sunshine on My Shoulders had become a soundtrack for millions of lives. He sang about nature, about the sky, about love, and then to lose him in such a lonely and sudden way felt like a cruel twist. Some people were angry. Not at John, necessarily, but at the system. At the idea that an experimental plane with such a flawed design had been allowed in the air. There were questions about whether rules needed to change, whether pilots flying those kinds of aircraft should be more closely monitored. The placement of the fuel valve became a symbol, not just of a design flaw, but of how small oversights can lead to huge consequences. For others, the news made them reflect. Here was a man who had achieved incredible success, touched so many lives, and yet still made a very human mistake. It reminded people that no amount of fame or experience can protect you from risk. Even someone as talented and well-loved as John Denver was vulnerable. It made fans more protective of his memory, not less, because it showed just how real he was. Even today, fans visit the site of the crash. Some leave flowers, others leave messages. But most come just to pay their respects to a man whose voice still brings comfort. And while the truth about how he died may not be what anyone wanted to hear, it doesn't take away what he gave the world while he was here. Even though John Denver's life ended far too soon, his music never really left us. From radio stations to streaming playlists, his songs still pop up all the time. Take Me Home, Country Roads is practically an anthem now, not just in the US but around the world. People sing it at weddings, bar nights, road trips. It's the kind of song that instantly brings a feeling of warmth and nostalgia. And that's just one of many hits he left behind. John's music wasn't just about catchy melodies, it was full of meaning. He wrote about nature, peace, love, and home. At a time when the world was noisy and divided, his songs felt like a gentle voice in the storm. Even now, with all the chaos in today's world, his lyrics still hit home. That's the thing about true art, it doesn't age. It stays relevant, no matter how much time passes. Aside from music, John Denver was also a passionate activist. He cared deeply about the environment and often used his platform to talk about issues like wildlife protection and clean energy. He even founded the WindStar Foundation to promote sustainable living. So his legacy isn't just musical, it's also about the values he stood for. In many ways, he was ahead of his time. In recent years, there's been a renewed interest in his life. Documentaries, tribute concerts, and social media fan pages have all helped keep his memory alive for younger generations. Even people who weren't alive when John Denver was at his peak are now discovering his voice and falling in love with it. That says a lot about the power of what he created. At the end of the day, John Denver is remembered not for how he died, but for how he lived. He brought light into the world through his music, and even though the final chapter of his life was tragic, it doesn't erase the joy he gave. His voice, his message, and his spirit are still here, every time one of his songs plays, or when someone looks up at a quiet mountain and hears his words echo in their mind. So now we know the truth behind the mystery that surrounded John Denver's death for so many years. It wasn't sabotage, and it wasn't some dramatic engine failure. It was something far more simple, and in a way, far more heartbreaking. A misplaced fuel switch, a split-second distraction, and a brilliant life was gone. That kind of ending doesn't make headlines the same way a scandal would, but it leaves an even deeper mark. Because it reminds us how fragile life really is. What happened to John Denver wasn't about recklessness or carelessness, it was about being human. Even someone with decades of experience, with passion and talent and love for the skies, can make a mistake. And when that mistake meets a poor design or a bad setup, the results can be tragic. That's what makes this story hit so hard. It wasn't just an accident, it was a chain of little things, stacking up, until it was too late to stop. But in the end, John's story isn't just about how he died. It's about how he lived. He gave the world music that made people feel understood. He sang about love, about the earth, about home. And those songs didn't fade with him, they stayed. They're still here, still touching hearts, still reminding people to slow down and appreciate what really matters. It's strange how someone can be gone for so long and still feel so present. But that's what John Denver achieved. His voice, his smile, the feeling you get when you hear those first few lines of Country Roads, those things never went away. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not the mystery of his death, but the magic of his life. So wherever you are right now, on the road, in your room, or just needing a moment of peace, put on a John Denver song. Listen closely. You'll hear more than just music. You'll hear a man who gave the world beauty, even in his final flight.